In December 2012, the lifeless body of 32-year-old Monica Salinas was discovered in the break room of an Amazon warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. The brutal murder sent shock waves through the community, but it was only the beginning of a twisted tale. An investigation would unravel a web of passion, betrayal, and obsession. What began in the spring of 2012 as an illicit affair between Monica and her married supervisor Jacob Tanner spiraled into a chilling series of events that would end in tragedy. At 6:47 a.m. on December 18, 2012, the usual hum of activity at the Amazon warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, was disrupted by a horrifying discovery. A young worker, arriving for the morning shift, stepped into the break room expecting to grab coffee and settle into another day of monotonous packing and shipping. Instead, they found Monica Salinas, her body slumped over the cold metal table, lifeless and covered in blood. Her face was nearly unrecognizable, swollen and bruised, with dark streaks staining the once vibrant skin. The wounds on her torso were shocking. Numerous stab marks etched a tale of unrestrained rage. A deep gash across her neck suggested an attack driven by something far darker than a moment of anger. Lying next to her on the floor, stained red and discarded, was a box cutter, the kind every warehouse employee used daily, now turned into a weapon of destruction. The air in the room was thick, not just with the smell of iron, but with an eerie silence, as though time itself had paused. Workers gathered outside, murmuring in disbelief as the police were called. By the time the Columbus PD arrived, the warehouse, a space usually filled with the sound of conveyor belts and the shuffle of hurried feet, had become a stage for tragedy. Within hours, detectives were deep into their investigation. They moved quickly, combing through Monica's life, searching for clues that could explain the ferocity of the attack. It didn't take long for the story of her affair with Jacob Tanner, a supervisor at the warehouse, to surface. Jacob, 40 years old, was well liked by most of his colleagues, though some whispered about the quiet tension he carried in his eyes, a man burdened by more than just the demands of the job. By December 20th, the detectives had pieced together enough threads to form a tangled web of betrayal and jealousy. Jacob wasn't the only one on their radar. His wife, Clara Tanner, became a focal point of the investigation. Clara was a woman known for her sharp temper and unpredictable behavior. She often visited the warehouse unannounced, her eyes scanning the floor for any hint of Jacob's indiscretions. While many dismissed her actions as paranoia, others recognized it as the desperation of someone who suspected the worst. As investigators dug deeper, the backstory that emerged revealed a tale as tragic as it was disturbing. Monica Salinas, 32 years old, had worked in the warehouse for 4 years. She was a woman of contrasts, a hard-working employee with an undeniable allure. Her co-workers often described her as magnetic, someone who could brighten even the most grueling shifts with her charm. But behind the confident exterior was a woman grappling with deep dissatisfaction. Monica's life had not been kind. A failed marriage left her disillusioned, and mounting debts weighed heavily on her shoulders. The long hours at the warehouse, while exhausting, provided a paycheck that kept her afloat, even as she longed for something more. It was this longing, a mix of hope and recklessness, that drew her to Jacob Tanner. Their connection began innocently enough, shared lunch breaks and casual conversations about the monotony of work. Jacob, despite his reserved nature, seemed to open up around Monica. By spring of 2012, those innocent moments had blossomed into something far more dangerous. Their affair, though passionate, was fraught with complications. Jacob often spoke of his unhappy marriage, framing his relationship with Clara as a prison he couldn't escape. Monica, longing for stability, began to hope for more than just stolen moments in parked cars or motels. She wanted a future with him, even if it meant tearing apart his current life. But Jacob was a man caught between two worlds. To his co-workers, he was a professional, someone who managed to stay composed under pressure. At home, he was a husband trapped in a marriage that had long since soured. Clara Tanner was not an easy woman to love. Known for her sharp tongue and piercing gaze, she had a presence that demanded attention and respect. Their marriage, though outwardly stable, was crumbling under the weight of mistrust. Clara's jealousy, though often dismissed as overbearing, was not without cause. She had noticed the subtle shifts in Jacob's behavior, the late nights at work, the hushed phone calls, the way he avoided her questions. By the summer of 2012, Clara's suspicions had reached a boiling point. She began showing up unannounced at the warehouse, her presence a looming shadow over Jacob's already strained composure. It was during these visits that Clara's attention turned to Monica. Aware of her husband's infidelity, but lacking proof, Clara began to see Monica as the obvious suspect. Phone records later revealed that by November, Clara had begun sending Monica threatening messages, each one more menacing than the last. Phrases like, "Stay away from my husband," and "You'll regret this," painted a picture of a woman teetering on the edge. Monica, for her part, tried to ignore the threats. She confided in a close friend about the messages, but dismissed them as empty words. She believed Clara's rage was nothing more than bluster, the desperate cries of a scorned wife. But as the weeks passed, the tension grew unbearable. The affair that had once seemed exciting and liberating now felt like a ticking time bomb. Jacob, too, was unraveling. Torn between his desire for Monica and his fear of Clara's wrath, he began to distance himself from both women. But this only fueled Clara's paranoia. Her visits to the warehouse became more frequent, her behavior more erratic. She was no longer just a wife trying to save her marriage. She was a woman on a mission, determined to protect what she believed was hers at any cost. By December, the stage was set for tragedy. Monica, still holding on to the hope that Jacob might choose her, was unaware of just how dangerous Clara had become. And Jacob, consumed by guilt and fear, failed to see the storm brewing around him. Clara's jealousy had transformed into obsession, and her obsession would soon push her to an unthinkable act. The events leading up to December 18th, 2012, were a collision of secrets, lies, and unchecked emotions. What had started as an affair, born of loneliness and longing, had spiraled into a nightmare that would leave one woman dead, a family shattered, and a community reeling from the horror of it all. On the night of December 17th, 2012, the normally quiet atmosphere of the Amazon warehouse break room erupted into tension. Security footage from that evening captured the intense exchange between Monica Salinas and Jacob Tanner. The grainy video showed Monica standing with her arms crossed, her body language radiating anger. Jacob stood a few feet away, his shoulders hunched, as though trying to shrink under her fiery gaze. It wasn't clear what was being said, but the argument lasted for several minutes. Monica's gestures grew more animated, her frustration evident in the way she pointed at Jacob. Eventually, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the break room, her steps hurried and forceful. Witnesses would later recount how she passed them on her way out, her face set in an expression of anger and perhaps even betrayal. Jacob, on the other hand, remained in the break room, staring at the floor. When he finally re-emerged, he avoided making eye contact with anyone, retreating to his desk and working in silence for the rest of the night. At the same time, miles away, in a modest suburban neighborhood, Clara Tanner was alone in her home. She sat in their dimly lit living room, the only sound coming from the clock ticking on the wall. At 10:15 p.m., she dialed Jacob's phone. When the call went unanswered, her suspicion grew into something more sinister. Clara had grown accustomed to Jacob's late nights, but this time was different. Her instincts screamed that he wasn't just working late. Later, traffic cameras would confirm that Clara's car was seen near the warehouse at 11:30 p.m., its headlights cutting through the cold December night. Whether she had planned to confront Monica or simply watch from a distance remained unclear, but her presence so close to the scene of the crime became a crucial piece of evidence in the days to come. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives began piecing together the twisted dynamics of the love triangle. Monica's co-workers painted a vivid picture of her increasingly complicated relationship with Jacob. She had confided in a few close friends about her frustrations, revealing that Jacob's reluctance to leave Clara had begun to wear on her. Monica, emboldened by her desire for something more, had recently decided to take matters into her own hands. She hinted at exposing their affair, hoping to force Jacob into choosing between her and his wife. It was a risky ultimatum, one fueled by desperation and the belief that Jacob truly loved her. But Jacob, caught between his fear of Clara and his feelings for Monica, pleaded with her to keep their relationship hidden. His pleas only angered Monica further, making her feel like a secret he wanted to bury instead of someone he wanted to embrace. Detectives speculated that this ultimatum, given only days before her death, was the breaking point. It added an explosive element to an already volatile situation. As the investigation progressed, evidence began to pile up against Clara. When the police searched her home, they uncovered disturbing signs of her growing obsession with Monica. Hidden in a drawer in their bedroom were printed photos of Monica, some marked with crude red X's drawn over her face. It was clear Clara had been keeping a close eye on the woman she viewed as a threat to her marriage. Even more chilling were the entries in Clara's diary. In these pages, she poured out her frustrations, suspicions, and dark thoughts. The detectives read through months of entries chronicling her fears about Jacob's infidelity. But the most damning entry was written on December 15th, 2012, just 2 days before Monica's murder. In bold, angry handwriting, Clara had written, "If she doesn't disappear, I will make her." The diary painted a picture of a woman spiraling into obsession. her jealousy festering into something far more dangerous. The investigators now had a motive: Clara's need to eliminate the woman she believed was stealing her husband. Jacob, meanwhile, found himself under increasing scrutiny. His initial interviews with the detectives were calm, but evasive. He denied any involvement in Monica's death and claimed that he had left the warehouse before anything happened. But as the questioning grew more intense, cracks began to show in his story. Under pressure, Jacob admitted that he had been in the warehouse when Monica was killed. He claimed he had been working late and left shortly afterward, though he couldn't provide an exact timeline of events. His vague answers raised more questions than they resolved. Forensic evidence only deepened the suspicions surrounding him. When DNA analysis of Jacob's uniform revealed traces of Monica's blood, the detectives couldn't ignore the implications. How had her blood ended up on his clothing if he had left before the murder? Jacob's explanations became increasingly defensive, but his inability to account for the evidence left the investigators convinced he wasn't telling them the full truth. Jacob's demeanor during the investigation painted a picture of a man trapped by his own choices. He had entered into an affair seeking escape from his troubled marriage, but now the consequences were spiraling out of control. Whether he had been directly involved in Monica's death or was simply withholding the information to protect someone else, his evasiveness only made him look guiltier. By the time all the pieces were laid out, the detectives were faced with a chilling scenario. Monica's ultimatum, Clara's obsession, and Jacob's evasions had created a perfect storm. What had begun as a secret affair had devolved into a tangled web of lies, jealousy, and rage. The events of December 17, 2012, were no longer just a chaotic series of coincidences. They were the culmination of months of tension, betrayal, and unchecked emotions, leading to a crime that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. March 6, 2013, marked a turning point in the tragic case that had shaken the quiet community of Columbus, Ohio. It was early that morning when police officers arrived at the Tanner household, their presence cutting through the stillness of the suburban neighborhood. Clara Tanner, who had been living in a tense bubble of suspicion since the murder, answered the door. Her face, pale and tight with restrained emotion, betrayed the storm brewing within her. The officers informed her of the charges. Clara, who had lived under the weight of growing evidence, seemed momentarily frozen before she was escorted into custody. The arrest sent shock waves through the town. Clara had always been known as a fiery and protective wife, but the idea that her jealousy had pushed her to such a brutal act left many stunned. In the weeks that followed, the prosecution began piecing together a damning case against her, one that would expose the dark and obsessive spiral that led to Monica's death. During the trial, which began in the spring of 2014, the prosecution painted a harrowing picture of Clara's descent into jealousy and rage. They presented evidence that Clara had been stalking Monica for weeks leading up to the murder. Witnesses from the warehouse described seeing Clara parked in her car across the street on multiple occasions, her eyes locked on the building as if waiting for something or someone. The most compelling piece of evidence, however, was her diary. Each page, filled with Clara's raw and increasingly unhinged thoughts, was like an open window into her mind. The entries grew darker as the months passed, with Clara documenting her suspicions about Jacob's affair in vivid detail. Prosecutors highlighted her chilling entry from December 15, 2012, where she vowed to make Monica disappear. Combined with the photos of Monica found in Clara's home, some marked with violent red X's, the diary painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and capable of dangerous extremes. Witness testimony further solidified the case. Several co-workers of Monica and Jacob took the stand, describing tense encounters with Clara. One witness recounted seeing Clara confront Monica in the warehouse parking lot weeks before the murder. Though no physical altercation occurred, the tension was palpable. Others spoke of Clara's reputation for erratic behavior, recalling her unexpected visits to the warehouse and her sharp, almost hostile tone when speaking to staff. As the trial progressed, Jacob Tanner became a reluctant centerpiece of the courtroom drama. While he was not charged with any crime, his role in the affair and his moral failings were laid bare for all to see. The affair, which he had desperately tried to keep hidden, was dissected in brutal detail. Prosecutors described how Jacob's indecision and attempts to placate both women had added fuel to the fire. Friends of Monica testified that she had grown increasingly frustrated with Jacob in the weeks leading up to her death, believing he would never leave Clara. Jacob, who appeared in court looking gaunt and defeated, did little to defend himself. His once pristine reputation as a dependable supervisor and family man was now in ruins. The trial exposed not just his affair, but the ripple effect of his choices on everyone involved. His marriage, already strained before Monica's death, became unsalvageable. Clara's defense team attempted to use Jacob's betrayal as a mitigating factor, framing him as the root of Clara's emotional instability, but the prosecution remained focused on Clara's own actions. By July 14, 2014, the jury had reached a verdict. After weeks of testimony, they found Clara Tanner guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing was a somber affair, the courtroom heavy with the weight of the tragedy. When the judge delivered the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, there was little celebration. Clara remained stoic as the decision was announced, her face betraying no emotion. For Monica's family and friends, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but not joy. The loss of Monica was a wound that would never fully heal. Jacob's life, while spared legally, was left in shambles. His resignation from the warehouse shortly after the trial was inevitable. The whispers and stares from his co-workers had become unbearable. His attempt to start over in a new city was his way of escaping the ghost of his choices. But those who knew him doubted he would ever find peace. He had not only lost Monica, but also his marriage, his job, and the respect of everyone around him. The warehouse community, too, struggled to recover. The break room, once a place of casual camaraderie, now carried a haunting air. Workers found it difficult to forget what had happened there, and many left their jobs within months of the trial. Those who remained spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy, unable to shake the memory of how quickly love, jealousy, and obsession had turned deadly. The story of Monica's murder became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions and the dangerous paths that jealousy can carve. The arrest and trial of Clara Tanner brought justice, but it could never undo the pain or bring back the life that had been so violently taken. For those who lived through it, the echoes of that December night in 2012 would remain forever etched in their minds. The murder of Monica Salinas, though solved in the eyes of the law, left a scar that the Columbus community struggled to heal. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that haunted people, it was the story behind it. What started as an affair, hidden in shadows, spiraled into a whirlwind of jealousy, betrayal, and violence. The warehouse where Monica worked, once a place of routine and mundane labor, now stood as a symbol of tragedy. For those who knew Monica, the memories of her were bittersweet. She was a woman full of contradictions, vibrant and strong, yet weighed down by the struggles of her life. Her co-workers often recalled how she had the ability to lighten even the most grueling shifts with her presence. The way she smiled through long hours, the quick jokes she shared to break the monotony, those small moments of humanity lingered in their minds. Yet beneath her cheerful exterior was a woman yearning for more, her life complicated by choices that would ultimately lead to her demise. Jacob Tanner, too, remained a part of the story, even after he left Columbus. His role in the tragedy could not be overlooked. To the outside world, he had been a steady, quiet figure in the warehouse, a supervisor who did his job well. But those who worked closely with him saw the cracks in his composure long before the murder. They remembered the stolen glances between him and Monica, the times they disappeared at the same moment, and the subtle tension that grew as rumors began to swirl. Jacob's choices cast a long shadow over his life and others. The affair, which had started as a fleeting escape from his strained marriage, became a burden he couldn't shake. His inability to face the consequences, to choose one path or another, had added fuel to the fire that consumed Monica's life. Though cleared of direct involvement in the murder, his guilt was evident in the way he carried himself. After his resignation, he disappeared from the city, leaving behind a reputation in tatters and relationships broken beyond repair. Clara Tanner, now serving a life sentence, became a figure of fascination and revulsion. Her name was spoken in hushed tones, her actions dissected by those who tried to make sense of her descent into violence. In prison, Clara reportedly kept to herself, her once fiery personality replaced by a cold, withdrawn demeanor. For the people of Columbus, she became a symbol of how far jealousy and obsession could push someone. The warehouse itself became a silent witness to the tragedy. Its sterile walls and humming machinery had once provided a rhythm to the workers' lives, a backdrop to their shared struggles and camaraderie. But after Monica's murder, it was impossible to walk through the break room without feeling the weight of what had happened there. Employees spoke of an unshakable chill that lingered in the air. The place where Monica had been found became a spot that many avoided, as though the tragedy had stained the very walls. For the community, the murder was a story that refused to fade. News outlets had covered every detail. During the trial, and even after the verdict, the case was revisited in true crime specials and local retrospectives. It became a tale that parents whispered to their children as a warning, a reminder of how dangerous unchecked emotions could be. In the months and years that followed, the ripple effects of the crime were felt in ways both subtle and profound. Co-workers who had once formed close bonds drifted apart, their shared grief too heavy to bear together. Some left the warehouse entirely, seeking new jobs in a bid to escape the memories. Others stayed, but they spoke less, their conversations tinged with caution and unease. Monica's family, devastated by the loss, struggled to rebuild their lives. Her parents, who had once been so proud of their daughter's resilience, were left grappling with the void her death created. They clung to photos and mementos, trying to keep her memory alive while wrestling with the senselessness of her death. Even for those on the periphery, the case became a haunting reminder of how quickly life could unravel. It wasn't just about Monica, or Jacob, or Clara. It was about the fragile lines that connect people, the choices that pull them closer, or push them apart. For many, the story of Monica Salinas was a lesson in the dangers of secrecy and the devastating power of emotions left unchecked. Years later, the warehouse continued its operations, its workers processing packages and meeting quotas as they always had. But for those who had been there on December 18, 2012, and in the months that followed, the place would never feel the same. It stood as a testament to the tragedy, a stark reminder that even in the most mundane settings, human lives can intersect in ways that lead to unimaginable consequences. The name Monica Salinas became a part of Columbus's collective memory, a story that would be retold not just for its shocking details, but for the lives it destroyed. It was a story of passion turned deadly, of a love triangle that spiraled out of control, and of a community forever marked by a crime that no one could have foreseen. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss our daily updates. Also, check out another shocking story we covered, the case of a state trooper who murdered his female co-worker to hide their affair. Share your thoughts with us in the comments.